So friends, we have discussed about the thermodynamics of the extraction process and how Fick's law and Gibbs free energy they have a value in understanding the extraction process. Now if we want to divide the extraction process in different phases, we can categorize the extraction, or we can divide the extraction process into three major phases depending upon the type of the extraction that is going on inside the plant matrix, whether it is convection or molecular diffusion. And these three phases you can understand by looking into the graph. So first phase is the CER, that is constant extraction rate or period. Now this is the period where the extraction process goes on at a constant rate, and majority of the process CER phase of the extraction, it involves the convection of the solute molecules into the solvent. During the CER phase of extraction, the solute molecules that are freely accessible, I would like to take you back to the diagram. Just imagine that diagram which we discussed in my previous lecture, that the solute molecules are present in 5 different forms, and some of the solute molecules were floating in the stagnant film that is formed outside the drug particle or the matrix particles. Some solute molecules, they float within the drug particles, and these solute molecules are freely accessible and they easily move into the solvent phase, and this happens largely due to the convection phenomena. And this is the phase of the extraction wherein the solute molecules which are freely accessible, they enter into the bulk solvent, and that is why the extraction moves on at a constant rate. Then the second phase is the FER, that is falling extraction rate period, and we name it as falling extraction rate because once the freely accessible solute molecules completely transfer into the bulk solvent, then next step is to dissolve the solute molecules which are adsorbed on the surface of the matrix. So solvent has to enter into the spaces between the powdered particles or the particles of the matrix, and they dissolve the solute molecules or the chemical compounds that are adsorbed on the surface, and once they dissolve it, they will move those solute molecules into the stagnant film. From stagnant film, they move into the bulk solvent through convection, and therefore both convection and diffusion process takes place in this phase of the extraction, because solvent molecules enter into the matrix particles through diffusion, and the solute molecules that are dissolved, they come out of the matrix through diffusion into the stagnant film, and from the stagnant film to the bulk solvent, they move with the help of convection process. And the third and the last phase of the extraction is the DC phase, which is known as diffusion controlled period. Now the solute molecules which were freely accessible have been extracted out. The molecules which were adsorbed on the surface, now they have also been extracted out during the FER phase, and now the solute molecules that are chemically bound to the matrix, they are left. So this phase is largely governed by the diffusion process, because the solvent has to diffuse inside the matrix particles, and it has to break the chemical bonds of the solute with the matrix, solubilize those solute molecules in it, and then diffuse them back to the bulk solvent. And this diffusion control period is almost brings the plateau phase in the overall extraction phase, as you can clearly see in the graph. Now the another important aspect of showing this graph is on the x-axis you will see the time that is required for each phase and the amount of the solvent. So as we move from CER, that is the first phase, to the last phase, substantial increase in the time of extraction is there, and also substantial increase in the amount of the solvent. Now this graph, purpose of showing this graph was when we will discuss about the exhaustive and non-exhaustive type of extraction ahead in the lecture, this graph will help you understanding about the difference between the exhaustive and the non-exhaustive extraction. So briefly, I will just give you an idea. If you are going for exhaustive extraction, that is, you want to extract out almost all the components from the plant matrix, you have to enter and complete the third, that is DC phase of the extraction process. Whereas if you want to go for non-exhaustive extraction, then you can continue the extraction just up to the FER, or you can complete the FER phase of the extraction process. Now, apart from the solubility aspect of the solute molecules in the solvent, there is another important aspect one has to take care of, that is interaction between the solute molecules or different types of solute molecules that are present in the plant matrix. As I told you, that plant matrix itself is a complex matrix which contain different types of solute molecules, and sometimes these solute molecules also interact with each other, and this interaction sometimes affects the extraction efficiency. I have taken an example of protein polyphenol complexes that are formed during the extraction. Now, if you want to extract isoflavones from soya products, we know that soya products are rich in isoflavones and they are also rich in proteins. So what happens is, these proteins, they form complex with these isoflavone molecules, and isoflavone molecules are the desired molecules that have to be extracted out of soya products. And once you are using the extraction procedure, any procedure you are using with a suitable solvent, such kind of complex formation, it hinders the solubility of this complex or the isoflavones into the solvent, thereby negatively impacting the overall extraction efficiency. So what kind of interaction that can happen between solute molecules or different solute molecules, like hydrogen bonding can be there, ionic or covalent binding of the different solute molecules can be there, or hydrophobic interactions can be there. So these kind of interactions which lead to the formation of complexes within the plant matrix, they sometimes have negative impact on the overall extraction efficiency, because such complexes are less soluble in the solvent. And to overcome such interactions, either we increase the temperature, or we alter with the pH of the mixture, or we take some other precautionary measure or the remedial step in order to overcome such kind of interaction and make our extraction process efficient. Now we move on to the exhaustive versus non-exhaustive extractions. So as I briefly told you when we were discussing about that graph, we have two type of extractions depending upon the type of extract or the purpose for which you are preparing the extract. So in case of exhaustive, as I already told you, virtually all components are extracted in comparison to the non-exhaustive method where less amount is extracted. In exhaustive extraction, we have high solvent to feed ratio. That is, large amount of solvent is required. Generally we use, say if you want to extract 1 gram of drug, you have to use 50 ml of solvent, or in some cases even 100 ml of solvent to extract 1 gram of drug. This is solvent to feed ratio, because you virtually want to extract almost all the components from the plant material, and you don't want the equilibrium to develop so easily or too early in the extraction phase, so that the extraction of the solute is incomplete. Whereas in case of non-exhaustive extraction, we use normally a very low solvent to feed ratio in comparison to exhaustive extraction, and generally it is 5:1 or 10:1. Exhaustive process is a slow process. Now here comes the role of that graph which showed the 3 phases of extraction, and we discussed that for exhaustive extractions we have to either enter into the DC phase, or we prefer to complete the diffusion controlled rate, that is the 3rd phase of the extraction. And with the end of the DC phase, there is a substantial increase in the time, and therefore exhaustive extractions are always considered as a slow process, whereas the non-exhaustive extractions, they can end up to the end of the FER, that is the 2nd phase of the extraction, which is less time consuming, and therefore these are considered as the faster process. And in industry, normally they prefer the non-exhaustive extraction, because those extracts are largely used for the preparation of the plant products. And if you enter into the DC phase, you are compromising, you are increasing the time duration of the extraction, which will compromise the overall economic viability of that process. because the time which is required to complete the DC phase, that time can be utilized for a non-exhaustive extraction of the second batch of the crude material. So this is how industry basically works. For them, the time is money, and therefore largely industrial manufacturers or the industry which are dealing in the preparation of extracts, they go for the non-exhaustive extraction. Whereas in case of exhaustive extractions, we only go for exhaustive extraction if they are to be used for analytical purpose, wherein you want to quantify the particular chemical constituent or you want to quantify different chemical constituents that are present. For such cases, your extract should be, or the process should be able to completely extract the components that are present in the plant matrix. And these analytical procedures or the exhaustive extractions for analytical purposes are largely used to standardize the plant material. So these are the few points which help in differentiating between the exhaustive extractions and the non-exhaustive extractions. Now we move on to various factors that can affect the extraction efficiency. First one is the solvent, and we have already discussed character of a good solvent that has to be used in the extraction process. Say for example, you are using a solvent which has low solubility for the desired component, and if you are using that solvent without having an emphasis on the solvent selection, then obviously the overall extraction efficiency for which you are extracting the plant material will decrease. The extract that you will prepare by using that solvent will have low therapeutic or biological efficacy. Second is the matrix nature. Now matrix nature means the type of the plant material you are using. The physical nature of that material also has an impact on the extraction efficiency. If you are using, say, softer plant material that is easy to extract, the solvent will easily diffuse into that material and it will have an impact on the overall extraction time and amount of the solvent that is used. And just imagine if you are having a hard plant material, a woody plant material, then it will require more time for the solvent to diffuse into that hard material. Vis-a-vis, you will also require large volume of the solvent to extract out the component from that particular hard material. Now if you haven't paid attention to the nature of the matrix and you have utilized less amount of solvent for extracting the hard material and less time of extraction is given, then the extraction efficiency is being affected. So one has to be very careful while selecting the extraction process, time of extraction and the temperature of extraction when we are dealing with different types of matrix. Next is the particle size of the matrix. We know that smaller the particle size, larger the surface area. Larger the surface area, more drug material will come in contact with the solvent. And when more drug material will come in contact with the solvent, better should be the extraction efficiency. But this principle is not true in every case. If you reduce the particle size below a threshold limit, because by and large we have seen in extraction process we use the powdered material of say 200 mesh or particle size between 100 to 200 mesh size. If you further decrease the particle size below 100 mesh size, then those fine particles sometimes form they agglomerate and they form masses during the extraction process, and it's very difficult sometimes for the solvent to penetrate into those masses, and this decreases the overall extraction efficiency. So again, particle size is also important for better extraction efficiency or better yield. Next is the temperature. Obviously we have seen the effect of temperature, we have understood the effect of temperature in Gibbs free energy equation. So in order to make the reaction spontaneous, in order to make the solubilization of the solute in the solvent spontaneous, we have to increase the temperature. But again, the increase in temperature should be up to a particular limit. If the constituents are thermosensitive, then we cannot afford to increase the temperature, because increased temperature will cause degradation of those constituents and will have a negative impact on the extraction efficiency. Vis-a-vis, if you are having thermolabile constituents or thermostable constituent and still you are extracting them at room temperature, again you are inviting much more longer extraction durations, you are inviting much more larger volumes of the solvent. Again the extraction efficiency has been impacted. Next is the time of extraction. This is also important because if you are extracting a drug for a smaller period of time, then extraction will be incomplete and the yield will have a negative impact on the extraction efficiency. Vis-a-vis, if you are over extracting a drug, then also that increased time period may not have a significant impact on the yield of the extract, but it will have a significant impact on increasing the overall cost of the extraction procedure, making it economically unviable. It has been observed in many cases. Say for example, I will explain this effect of time of extraction by giving an example. We extract say 1 kg of a drug and we extract that drug say for 10 hours, and by extracting that 1 kg drug for 10 hours we get 10% yield, 100 gram of extract, that is 100 gram of extract. Now we wish to increase the extraction time say to 20 hours. We are doubling the extraction time, and by doubling the extraction time we are getting an increase in the yield say up to 13% or 14%, that is 130 or 140 gram of the extract. But if you compare the overall cost involved by increasing the time of extraction, because with the time sometimes the volume of the solvent has to be increased, so the overall cost that is involved in increasing the time of extraction does not justifies the increase in the yield of the extract, and therefore the overall extraction efficiency decreases. Next is drug to solvent ratio, that is how much solvent do you use to extract a given amount of the drug. We have discussed for exhaustive extraction we require higher solvent volumes in comparison to the non-exhaustive extractions. But if you are extracting, say for example, if you are going for a non-exhaustive extraction and you are extracting a drug with less amount of solvent, obviously that solvent will become very easily saturated with the solute molecules and the overall extraction efficiency will decrease. And on the contrary, if you are using large amount of the solvent to extract the same amount of drug, then the cost factor comes into the play and the process may become economically unviable. So you should optimize the drug to solvent ratio. You should optimize the volume of the solvent you want to use to extract the given amount of the drug. And last but not the least is the shaking or the agitation. And we have seen that by shaking the mixture of the drug and the solvent, we disturb the equilibrium formation. And once this equilibrium formation is disturbed, then the extraction process continues. So it has a overall positive impact on the extraction efficiency. But if the agitation or shaking is vigorous, then it sometimes damages the cellular material, and this have a negative impact on the extraction efficiency. So all these parameters have to be optimized if you want to develop a very good extraction procedure. And if we see that all these parameters are interrelated, any change in one parameter has a direct impact on the other parameter, and that will have indirect impact on the overall extraction efficiency. So we can say that no single and standard method is there for the extraction of different plant materials, because every plant material, every matrix has its own character, has its own nature, and therefore we cannot say that this particular single method, though technique can be same. When we say method, it means the combination of different parameters that are required to extract. Technique can be maceration or any other extraction technique, but there is no single and standard method that can be used for different types of drug. Every method that is designed to extract a particular drug material will have its own advantages and disadvantages. And we have discussed various factors like nature of matrix, type of constituents, cost of the drug, and overall extraction procedure. and use of extract, that is the purpose for which you want to use that extract, whether that extract is will be used for analytical purpose or it will be used to prepare certain plant product, will govern the selection of the method, will govern the selection of the parameters that are involved in extraction of that particular drug. So one has to be very careful regarding all these factors which we have discussed when we are talking, or when we are establishing, when we are developing an extraction method for a particular plant. Now there are different conventional extraction techniques that are being used since ages to extract the plant material, and these are maceration, digestion, infusion, decoction, refluxing of the drug, percolation of the drug, and soxylation of the drug. Now all these techniques, why I am calling them as conventional, because these techniques are being utilized since yesteryears, when we don't have any understanding of the scientific mechanism that is behind the extraction process. What is the chemistry behind the extraction process? When it was not clear, since then we are using these techniques, and therefore we call them as conventional techniques. So friends, in my next lecture I'll be discussing about these conventional techniques of extraction, wherein I'll be focusing upon the basic principle behind the extraction, or behind these techniques. What are the modifications that have been done over the period of time in order to improve the efficiency of these extraction techniques? Because as I told you that we are living in a technological world, and with passage of time the technology is improving, and so we have to also improve these conventional techniques, and there are modifications that have been done in these conventional techniques, both at the laboratory level as well as at the large scale or the industrial scale. So in the next lecture we will be discussing about all these techniques and their modifications. Thank you.